Hello everyone, my name is Adriana Gonzalez and I will be demonstrating Packet Tracer 7.2-10, configuring DHCPv4. So first, to start out, this is our addressing table where we'll reference this throughout our example. So this Packet Tracer is split into 4 different parts. The first part is configuring the router as a DHCP server, which we'll do with R1 and R3. And then second, configure DHCP relay. 3, configure a router as DHCP client. And 4, verifying the DHCP and connectivity overall. So to begin, it asks us to configure, for part 1, to configure the excluded IPv4 addresses. So in order to do this, we're going to go and we're going to configure this through R2. So opening up R2. Let me make this smaller. Okay, so we will hit enable, configure, terminal, excuse me, and then we're going to go ahead and do what they asked us, which was to exclude the first 10 addresses from R1 lane using this command right here. We're going to put in IP DHCP excluded addresses, and we're going to put 192.168. This you can get from the addressing table 10.1, and they want us to exclude the first 10, so 9.2.168.10.10. So this takes out all addresses 1 through 10, and we're going to hit enter and go back to our instructions for part 1, or for step 1, and configure R2 to exclude the first 10 addresses from R3 lane. So here's R3 lane, and we're going to go through R2. So under R2, we're going to do the same. We're going to put IP DHCP excluded address 192.168-30, because we're doing R3 lane now, dash 192.168 3.0, or not 0, sorry, 10. Within step 2, we're going to create a DHCP pool on R2 for the R1 lane. We'll start by opening up R2. And following the instructions as such. So first, they're asking us to create a DHCP pool named R1 lane. This is case sensitive, so we're going to go ahead and put in IP DHCP pool R1 LAN. Make sure that's correct. Okay. The next step would be configure the DHCP pool to include the network address, the default gateway, and the IP address of the DNS server. This is provided here. Here's the network, here's the default router, and the DNS server. So we are going to plug this in on R2 to include the network, the default gateway, and the DNS server. Now that we are DHCP configuration, we're going to network at the network 192.168.10.0 space 255.255.255.0. Now that we have that, verify that that's correct. verified 10. Enter. So now we're going to add the default gateway, default router, the default router 192.168.10.1. And lastly, the DNS server, 192.168. 254. Now that all of them are added, we can proceed to step 3. Following step 3 to create a DHCP pool on R2 to R3. This is similar to step 2. So they want us to open up R2. And following what we previously did, we are going to input IP DHCP pool R3 lane. Oh, my bad. I didn't know that I was not typing. We're IP DHCP pool R3 lane. Enter. So now configure the DHCP pool to include the network address, the default gateway, and the IP address of the DNS server. Refer to the addressing table. So this is similar, like I said, here. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I've taken these from the addressing table. Network 192.168.30. This is the difference, the 3.0 space. Then we're doing 255.255.0. Enter. That's the network. So now we're going to do the default router. Here, default router 192.168.30.1. Lastly, we're going to do the DNS server. That's 192.168.20.254. Enter. That concludes part 1, and we can now move on to part 2. So moving on to part 2, configuring DHCP relay. So in the first step, we're going to configure R1 and R3 as a DHCP relay agent. Starting with configuring the helper address for the LAN interface on R1. So here, this is R1. And then second, it's going to ask us for B, configure the helper address for the LAN interface on R3. That you can find right here. Here's R3. So let's start with R1. We are going to head and enable configure terminal. I'm sorry. And then we're going to follow the steps here on R1 to interface G00/0. So we'll now put in int G0/0 and hit enter, followed by IP helper address 10.1.1.2. Okay, now that we've done this, we can exit out of R1 and we're going to go to R3 to configure the helper address for the LAN interface. Opening up R3, we are going to do the similar to R1, enable, configure terminal, start with int G0/0. This you can get from the addressing table, IP helper address 10.2.2.2. So this connects all LAN interface on R3. We can exit out of this, and now we can move on to step 2. For step 2, we're going ahead and configure host to receive IP addressing information from DHCP. So configure host PC1 and PC2 to receive their IP addresses from a DHCP server. So, and then we're going to verify the hosts have received their addresses from correct DHCP pools. So to do this, we're going to pull up PC1. We're going to go to IP configuration. We're going to hit DHCP, and it should populate this right here. We can verify these with R2. So in R2, in here, you can see the IPv address is correct. The subnet mask is correct. The default gateway is correct here to here. And the DNS server is also correct right here to there. Now let's check PC2. And we're going to hit IP configuration, go ahead and DHCP, let it request, and then let's verify with R2. So, network, correct, default gateway, correct, and DNS server, correct. Now that we've verified that the hosts have received their addresses, we can move on to part 3, configuring a router as a DHCP client. Okay, so for part A, to configure the Gigabit Ethernet 01 interface on R2 to receive IP addressing from DHCP and activate the interface. So we're going to follow the instructions. We're going to go ahead and open up R2. And from R2, we are already... Okay, well, we have to enable to get back in config terminal. Okay. Now that we are in, we will go ahead and put intg, and I'm taking this from the instructions, and then IP address DHCP. Make sure that's correct. Okay. Now we make sure to put no shutdown. So now we need to make sure that this turns green, so give it a moment, and it should be turning green now that we've configured. Now that it is green, we can go ahead and go to B, use the show IP interface brief command to verify that R2 received an IP address from DHCP. So opening up R2, we are going to exit and take it back to R2, show IP address, show IP interface brief. So here you can see Gigabit Ethernet 01 is assigned. Yes, the method is DHCP, status is up, and protocol is up. Now we can move on to part 4, verifying DHCP and connectivity. So step 1, verify DHCP bindings. So we are going to go to R2, and I had already previously done this to make sure. Show IP, I will do it again, DHCP binding. My bad, misspelled. Show IP DHCP binding. Here you can see our hardware address for PC1, and it's automatic both matching. Going to PC, let's move this. Going to PC1. We can IP config /all. In the physical address, you can see that it matches